Well, as we've been saying last night, Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn took part in that final head-to-head debate. A Snap YouGov poll calling the contest, well, pretty much a draw, 52% to 48% for Boris Johnson. There's a margin of error built in that, of course. Jeremy Corbyn is trailing in the polls, needed a breakthrough moment, didn't get one. It was pretty much a safety-first sort of contest, really. Well, Diana Magnay has been following the Labour campaign, and she's in Barry in South Wales this morning. I mean, there really needed to be a game-changer for Jeremy Corbyn. He didn't have one last night. Does that put the pressure on for the next 5 days?
I think so. He is now touring marginal seats here in Wales, really trying to make sure that they swing his way. He doesn't need that much for this to be a hung parliament, but if the polls are anything to go by at the moment, it looks like the Tories are on for a majority. I mean, it was interesting in that debate last night. It could have been the moment where he really went on the attack against Boris Johnson, or where he came out with a particular card up his sleeve, but he clearly didn't have one. And it was very much a kind of rehearsed party lines that both leaders came out with. I think if you've been following this election campaign from the start, you won't have heard anything in that debate that you'd heard before. And Jeremy Corbyn, given the fact that Boris Johnson's campaign has been A, talking about getting Brexit done, and B, going on the attack against Jeremy Corbyn, Mr. Corbyn didn't really go on the attack back. I mean, he talked to him about his record on Islamophobia and says, I hope, Prime Minister, you recognise the hurt that you have caused to people. But he really didn't go for the jugular, I suppose, in line with what we've heard often over the course of this campaign, which is when they go low, we go high. And I just wonder whether it would have made a difference if he decided to go more on the attack. You know, that YouGov poll with those numbers that are so cursed in this country, really, over the last few years since the referendum, 48, 52. Essentially, people seem to think that in that debate, Boris Johnson came across as more prime ministerial, but Jeremy Corbyn was more to be trusted. If you look back at 2017 and you compare the sort of rise in Labour's ratings and in Mr. Corbyn's popularity after the manifesto was published with now, you're seeing a bit of a shift up, but it's certainly not to the extent that it was 2 years ago. There was a pollster on this programme a couple of weeks ago who said, I think it's impossible to re-inflate that balloon, and I think those words were very fitting.
Look, it's odd but handy having our Moscow correspondent in Barry this morning, because obviously we've got this whole line that it's been around in the week a little bit, but now this move from Reddit to ban 61 accounts, that it says a link to this NHS report that Labour were using the other week to claim that the NHS was up for grabs if the Conservative government got in. What are we to make of all of this, and at least the possibility that there has been an attempted Russian interference in this election?
Yes, this particular group called Secondary Infection that Facebook identified on its account a couple of months ago. And earlier in the week, we heard that there were suggestions that the documents released on Reddit may also have been amplified, if not obtained, but at least amplified by a campaign that bore all the hallmarks of this secondary infection group, which was associated with Russia. I think the implication is that clearly these Russian trolling operations are trying to interfere. We know that as almost as a policy, they look to exploit divisions and cracks within democratic processes in the West. Clearly, the implication here is that it is more beneficial for Russia to see the likes of Jeremy Corbyn perhaps in power. He is not as it may continue the uncertainty, I suppose, over Brexit if he calls for a second referendum. You know, that is all taking it 5 steps ahead. But I think what is important is the fact that these groups are associated with Russia. They're clearly trying to needle any way that they can in the functioning of this election for whatever purpose that you may wish to then attribute further up the chain. and it is important to identify closely how and what is responsible. Jeremy Corbyn's position on this so far has been really to say, well, look at Boris Johnson, he needs to release the Russia report, which is absolutely true and valid. But I think Labour also needs to give some answers as to where exactly they sourced this document from. Perhaps it was emailed to them in exactly the same way as it was to various journalists once it was published on the Reddit site. But Labour needs to be more outspoken about the possibility of Russian interference in this campaign.
OK, Diana, for now, thank you.